Welcome to Unsolved Cases, brought to you by Skoob. I'm your host, Larry Hunter, and today we're diving deep into one of America's most chilling unsolved mysteries. Picture this: Cleveland, Ohio, in the 1930s. A city gripped by fear, haunted by a killer so methodical, so precise, that even the legendary Eliot Ness couldn't catch him. This is the story of the Kingsbury Run Murders, a series of brutal killings that challenged everything investigators thought they knew about criminal psychology, forensic science, and the very nature of evil itself. But this isn't just a tale of violence and fear. It's a story of relentless pursuit, of a community desperate for justice, and of the shadows that still linger over a city haunted by the unknown. Today, we peel back the layers of the Kingsbury Run case. We'll explore the crime scenes, the suspects, the failures, and the breakthroughs, alongside the voices of investigators, historians, and families still seeking answers. So settle in, because today we uncover the chilling truth behind one of America's most baffling cold cases. This is the Kingsbury Run Murders investigation, and you're listening to Unsolved Cases with Larry Hunter. Picture this: February 23rd, 1937. The shores of Lake Erie stretch endlessly under a gray winter sky. Robert Smith, a 55-year-old man seeking nothing more than driftwood for his fire, walks the beach at Beulah Park, just 10 miles northeast of the infamous Kingsbury Run. At 1:40 p.m., something white catches his eye near the shoreline. At first glance, it looks like the carcass of a sheep, maybe a dog that had washed ashore. But as Robert approaches, his casual afternoon walk transforms into a nightmare that would haunt Cleveland for decades. What he discovered wasn't an animal at all. It was the upper half of a woman's torso, headless, armless, and bearing the unmistakable marks of deliberate dismemberment. Robert immediately contacted the police, and Lieutenant William Sargent was the first to arrive. Despite the bitter cold wind cutting across the lake, Sargent carefully examined the gruesome discovery. The torso lay just feet from the shoreline, the waves having deposited it like some macabre piece of driftwood. But here's where the investigation took its first crucial turn. When Sergeant James T. Hogan arrived with Detective Inspector Joseph M. Sweeney and Detective Orley May, Hogan made an observation that would prove vital to understanding how the killer operated. As he retrieved the torso from the icy water, Hogan noted something telling. The only footprints in the sand belonged to Robert Smith and Lieutenant Sargent. No one had carried this body part to the beach. It had washed ashore naturally, meaning the killer had disposed of it elsewhere, likely somewhere between Beulah Park and Lakewood. Hogan speculated to reporters that the body part had probably appeared within the last 2 days, as local boys had been playing on the beach the day before and hadn't seen anything unusual. Sand and gravel were embedded deep in the flesh, clinging to the severed surfaces like nature's own evidence markers. The detectives spread out along the beach, searching a mile in each direction, but found nothing else. The lake had given up only this one horrible secret. At 3:30 that afternoon, County Pathologist Reuben Strauss began his examination at the morgue. What he found painted a picture of the victim, and perhaps more importantly, of her killer. The woman had fair skin and light brown hair. Her lungs showed the telltale signs of a city dweller, darkened by urban pollution. Strauss estimated she was between 25 and 35 years old, weighing around 120 pounds, and standing between 5 feet 5 inches and 5 feet 8 inches tall. But it was the dismemberment itself that told the most chilling story. The killer had used a large, heavy knife, but here's what made investigators' blood run cold. There were multiple hesitation marks on all the severed surfaces. These weren't the quick, confident cuts of a butcher or surgeon. They were the careful, deliberate marks of someone who was thinking, planning, perhaps even savoring each cut. The woman had not died from decapitation. Her heart had already stopped beating when her head was removed. The exact cause of death remained unclear, but one thing was certain. She had been dead for only 2 to 4 days. Even among the experts, there was disagreement. Coroner Samuel Gerber believed the woman had given birth at least once, possibly twice, based on the development of her breasts. But pathologist Strauss disagreed completely, arguing she had never given birth. This wasn't just a medical disagreement. It highlighted a fundamental problem plaguing the investigation. If the experts couldn't agree on basic facts about the victims, how could they hope to understand the killer? Initially, Detective Inspector Sweeney and Sergeant Hogan weren't even convinced this was connected to Cleveland's other torso murders. The dismemberment seemed less skillful than previous victims, and the location was far from the usual discovery sites in Kingsbury Run. Most importantly, decapitation wasn't the cause of death this time. But pathologist Strauss disagreed with his colleagues. He maintained that this murder was driven by the same motivations as the previous ones. Detective Orley May, perhaps weary from months of investigation, grimly accepted the reality. He gives us one regularly every 5 months. Eventually, despite the differences, this unidentified woman was officially declared the butcher's 7th victim. The Lady of the Lake had joined the growing list of the dead, and Cleveland's nightmare continued. 3 months later, on June 6, 1937, the killer struck again. But this time, the discovery came from an unexpected source. Russell Lauer, just a teenager walking home, noticed something unusual in a pile of garbage and dirt under the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge. What caught his attention was a human skull, sitting in what appeared to be relatively fresh debris. When police arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the area. Under the same bridge, which spans the Cuyahoga River, they found a burlap bag. Inside was a human skeleton, missing the arms and legs, the killer's signature calling card. The pathologist's examination revealed this was a small African-American woman, aged 30 to 40, who had been dead for approximately 1 year. Police hoped her dental work might provide the identification that had eluded them with so many other victims. This is where Detective Peter Marilow entered the story in a significant way. Marilow suspected the victim was Rose Wallace, a 40-year-old woman who had disappeared on August 21, 1936. But there was a problem, a big one. Rose had disappeared nearly 3 months after the coroner estimated this victim had died. The investigation hit another dead end when they tried to verify through dental records. The dentist, who had performed her dental work, had died 15 years earlier, and all her dental records had been destroyed. It was as if fate itself was conspiring to keep the victim's identity secret. In a strange twist, in April 1938, nearly a year later, a man came forward claiming the victim was his mother, Rose Wallace. But even this potential breakthrough led nowhere. The timing of her disappearance still didn't match the coroner's timeline. Detective Marilow found himself no closer to identifying the killer than when he started. The butcher remained a phantom, leaving behind only carefully dismembered remains and a city paralyzed by fear. While the public knew about the tireless work of detectives like Marilow and Zalewski, what they didn't know was that a parallel investigation was taking place in the shadows, one led by none other than Eliot Ness himself. Drawing from his successful methods in Chicago, Ness formed a small, independent investigation team known as the Unknowns. This covert group was privately funded by unnamed businessmen and civic leaders, originally concerned about escalating labor racketeering. But at some point, Ness deployed this secret team on the torso murders as well. Why would Ness keep his own police department in the dark? Was he questioning the efficiency and reliability of his officers? Or was he concerned about the escalating media coverage? Ness was comfortable with publicity when it served his purposes. But perhaps he believed too much attention could jeopardize a sensitive investigation using unconventional methods. Whatever his reasoning, by the late 1930s and early 1940s, Cleveland had 2 separate but parallel investigations running. A very public one, controlled by James Hogan, with Merylo and Zalewski leading the charge, and a secret one, led by Ness and his inner circle. Meanwhile, Merylo and Zalewski were pursuing every lead, no matter how bizarre. They investigated a black man seen behaving inappropriately in Kingsbury Run. They explored possible connections to racketeering at the Northern Ohio food terminal. One particularly strange lead came from frightened prostitutes who reported a man who paid women to burn his chest hair with burning paper while he pretended to stab them. Another terrified woman reported seeing a man chopping what appeared to be bloody flesh in Kingsbury Run, only to discover it was the remains of a butchered watermelon. In one case, they arrested a 36-year-old former slaughterhouse worker who was chasing his neighbors with an axe. This disturbed individual claimed he wasn't after people, but evil spirits that he would kill once he determined their gender. Extraordinary crimes required extraordinary measures. Instructions came from the highest levels of the police department. All officers were to randomly stop and check cars, late at night and early in the morning, hoping to catch the killer in the act of disposing of a body. Assuming the killer would be covered in blood after committing murder, investigators searched every laundry in Cleveland. They found plenty of bloody clothing, evidence of various accidents and injuries, but every stain could be logically explained. At the request of prominent businessmen who wanted to play detective, Merylo and Zalewski spent 2 weeks searching all of Cleveland's slaughterhouses on the southwest side. After this exhaustive investigation, Merylo became convinced that the murderer could not be an ordinary butcher. The precision and anatomical knowledge displayed in the dismemberments suggested something far more sophisticated. The investigation took an even darker turn when they decided to check Cleveland's Potter's Field. Working on the assumption that someone might be stealing and mutilating bodies of the poor as some sick joke, they began exhuming recently buried corpses to ensure each plain coffin actually contained a body. After Merylo and Zalewski had exhumed dozens of bodies, unidentified medical men provided them with a crucial anatomical fact that changed everything. If the bodies had been dug up from graves, traces of blood would still be evident in the arteries. In the torso victims, there was no blood at all. This single observation eliminated grave robbing as a possibility and confirmed what investigators had feared all along. They were dealing with someone who was killing living people, not desecrating the already dead. As if the investigation wasn't complicated enough, internal conflicts began tearing apart the case from within. Coroner Samuel Gerber revisited his initial analysis and concluded that the knife cuts in the recent murders were consistent with those found on previous Kingsbury Run victims. Gerber made a bold claim. The killer possessed a high level of intelligence in recognizing anatomical landmarks, indicating possible formal medical training. But he disagreed with prevailing theories about the killer's motivations. Unlike other experts who suspected sexual perversion, Gerber believed the killer targeted both men and women without sexual motivation. Instead, he proposed that drugs and alcohol might have unleashed the killer's violence. This represented a dramatic departure from the conclusions of Dr. Coburn Pierce, his predecessor. Just 5 months earlier, experts had been hesitant to label the murderer as medically trained, but leaned toward sexual aberration as a motive. Now Gerber was challenging not only his predecessor's determinations, but also contradicting numerous lead investigators' opinions. The tensions escalated when Gerber began making public communications through articles and speeches about the killings. The police department was particularly irritated, feeling they had exerted extensive, albeit unproductive effort on the cases. They viewed the coroner's role as unsuitable for conducting detective work. The situation reached a boiling point when Gerber's name appeared in a sensational magazine article that solicited readers to solve the mystery of Cleveland's headless cadavers for prize money in 200 words or fewer. Law enforcement saw this as a publicity stunt that undermined their serious investigative work. At the Lakeside Avenue morgue, these disputes escalated further. Gerber didn't include the earlier Lady of the Lake victim in his analysis. But pathologist Strauss saw clear connections between the Euclid Beach victims despite the 2.5-year gap. Strauss maintained that the torso's dismemberment matched previous methods, pointing out that the decapitation showed striking resemblances. The head severed cleanly between the third and fourth vertebrae with surgical precision. Unlike Gerber, Strauss refrained from speculating about drugs or sexual impulses, suggesting instead that the same motivations applied across all murders. The investigation took a dramatic turn with the arrest and subsequent death of Frank DOLEZAL, a suspect connected to the Kingsbury Run murders. But DOLEZAL's death in custody would raise questions that persist to this day. In the early summer of 2000, those questions took on new urgency when Andrew Shug and Rebecca McFarland, members of the Cleveland Police Historical Society, gained access to archival materials stored at the city morgue. They were gathering materials for a historical exhibit about Eliot Ness and the Kingsbury Run murders. What they discovered would challenge the official story of DOLEZAL's death. Among the materials were large, disturbing autopsy photographs of Frank DOLEZAL. 2 images prominently displayed a thin, defined scar circling DOLEZAL's neck, allegedly caused by a makeshift noose during his suicide in jail. But something was wrong. The mark was narrow and deeply set, resembling something made by piano wire rather than the thick rags that officials claimed had been used. McFarland observed, "I'm not a pathologist, but I don't see how a noose made of rags could leave that kind of mark." Shug agreed with her assessment. David Satula, another researcher, had examined the same photos a few years earlier and reached similar conclusions. Coincidentally, just before viewing the images, Satula had read about typical hanging injuries. His source described a classic V-shaped abrasion on the upper neck from the upward pressure of a rope. DOLEZAL's scar was different. It was situated in the center of the neck and lacked the telltale V-shaped pattern. To Satula, this seemed far more consistent with strangulation than traditional hanging. Another troubling detail was the timing. According to jail records, DOLEZAL had been left unattended for only a few minutes. While this might have been sufficient time to cause death by asphyxiation, it seemed unlikely that such a brief period could result in such a distinctive, deep line if thick rags were the only material involved. Around 2003 or 2004, these photos were reviewed again as part of a renewed investigation into the Kingsbury Run murders. The more they were studied, the more they raised doubts about Coroner Gerber's 1939 ruling of suicide. The evidence suggested a disturbing possibility. Frank DOLEZAL may not have committed suicide at all. Had someone silenced him to prevent him from talking? Was his death a cover-up designed to protect the real killer or shield the investigation from embarrassment? Sometimes, the most significant breakthroughs come from the most unexpected sources. In August 2012, James Jesson Badal, Cleveland's renowned scholar of evil, who has spent years studying the Kingsbury Run case, gave a public lecture on the murders. After the talk, someone handed him an aged, deteriorated photograph. Despite its faded condition, the image was striking. 6 young men, dressed in medical whites, standing in front of what appeared to be a medical practice at 5026 Broadway Avenue, directly across from St. Alexis Hospital. This location was at the heart of a vibrant Central European neighborhood on Cleveland's east side during the 1920s. One of the young doctors in the photo was identified as Frank Sweeney, a name that would become central to theories about the Kingsbury Run killer. To Badal, this wasn't just a historical curiosity. It was potentially the breakthrough investigators had been seeking for decades. The area where the photo was taken was where Sweeney completed his medical internship. But more importantly, it connected to one of the most haunting stories in the entire case, that of Emil Fronek, the one who got away. Fronek claimed to have survived a terrifying ordeal in what he described as a house of horror. His inability to locate this place again, even after years of searching with Detective Peter Murillo, had frustrated investigators and cast doubt on his story. But now, Badal had a photograph that placed Sweeney in a specific location that matched Fronek's account. If the structure in the image was indeed the murder laboratory that investigators had searched for, it could be the most direct physical evidence ever found. Badal discovered crucial details about the building. It wasn't a traditional office structure, but a converted two-story home, redesigned as a medical clinic. The first floor included a reception area, examination room, and space for minor surgical procedures. The second floor retained its original residential layout. This matched Fronek's memories perfectly. The building's location between railroad tracks corresponded with Fronek's claim that he had hidden in an abandoned boxcar after escaping. The preserved living quarters on the second floor might explain where Sweeney lived after his divorce, during a period when he mysteriously vanished from public records. Adding weight to this theory, several key landmarks from the investigation, including the notorious Jackass Hill and the stagnant murder pool, were all within walking distance of the Broadway Avenue address. For Badal, who had previously maintained there was no absolute proof linking Dr. Francis Sweeney to the killings, this photograph represented something extraordinary, a visual link to what might be the hidden truth behind Cleveland's most disturbing unsolved case. As spring arrived in 1937, the investigation had reached a critical juncture. In March, Cuyahoga County Coroner Samuel Gerber prepared a comprehensive report on the first 7 murders, hoping to find patterns that might finally lead to the killer. What Gerber found was both illuminating and terrifying. He noted the complete absence of blood clots in 4 victims, suggesting they had died by decapitation or been decapitated immediately after murder. This wasn't random violence. It was systematic, methodical killing that suggested either medical knowledge or extensive practice. By April 1937, Police Chief George Matowitz was struggling with a complete lack of viable leads. In a move that demonstrated the department's desperation, he reached out directly to Cleveland newspaper editors with an unusual request. Ask your readers to report any suspicious activity to the police. This public plea represented an admission that traditional police work had failed. The killer was too careful, too intelligent, and too familiar with investigative methods. The police were essentially asking the entire city of Cleveland to become their eyes and ears. But even this unprecedented level of public involvement failed to produce the breakthrough investigators desperately needed. The killer remained a phantom, leaving behind only bodies and a city paralyzed by fear. The Kingsbury Run murders had evolved from a criminal investigation into something far more sinister, a psychological war between a methodical killer and an entire city's law enforcement apparatus. And so far, the killer was winning. As we reach the end of our journey through the darkest chapter in Cleveland's history, we're left with more questions than answers. The Kingsbury Run murders represent one of America's most baffling unsolved cases, a series of crimes so methodical and precise that they challenged everything investigators thought they knew about criminal behavior. We've seen how the Lady of the Lake washed ashore that February day in 1937, beginning a new chapter in Cleveland's nightmare. We've followed detectives like Peter Marilow and Zalewski as they pursued every lead, no matter how bizarre. We've witnessed the internal conflicts between coroners and pathologists, each offering different theories about the killer's identity and motivations. Most haunting of all, we've explored the possibility that Frank DOLEZAL's death was not suicide but murder, a cover-up designed to silence someone who knew too much. And we've seen how a single photograph from the 1920s might hold the key to finally identifying the butcher of Kingsbury Run. The questions that plagued investigators in the 1930s remain unanswered today. Was Dr. Francis Sweeney the killer, as some believe? Was Emil Fronek's story of escape from a house of horror the key to solving the case? Did Eliot Ness and his secret team know more than they ever revealed? Perhaps most troubling of all, if Frank DOLEZAL was murdered in his cell to prevent him from talking, what secrets died with him? And who had the power and motivation to silence him permanently? The shadows that fell across Kingsbury Run in the 1930s have never fully lifted. Somewhere in Cleveland's history, in its archives and forgotten corners, the truth may still be waiting. The victims, the Lady of the Lake, Rose Wallace, and all the others, deserve to have their stories told and their killer finally named. Until that day comes, the Kingsbury Run murders remain what they've always been, a testament to the darkness that can lurk in the human heart and the courage of those who refuse to let evil go unpunished. That's our deep dive into the haunting mystery of the Kingsbury Run murders, a case that shook 1930s Cleveland and left a chilling mark on the city's history. From brutal crime scenes to tireless investigations, from fleeting leads to cold trails, this story is one of fear, frustration, and unanswered questions. But this isn't just a tale of violence. It's about the struggle to find justice in the face of darkness and the echoes of a killer who slipped through the cracks of time and law enforcement. If you want to go deeper into the Kingsbury Run murders and other baffling cold cases, head over to the Skoob app. Because this isn't just true crime. It's a journey into the heart of mystery and the search for truth that never ends. Download Skoob on the App Store or Google Play to unlock the full experience. I'm Larry Hunter, and this has been Unsolved Cases. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and remember, some stories don't end, they only wait to be solved.